Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mind Games podcast. What episode are we on now?
Don't know.
Does it even matter anymore?
The next episode is Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. So
great song.
Well put it.
Great song. Welcome to the latest episode. There we go, of the Mind Games podcast. For each episode, we piece together the puzzle that is mental health with a bit of stuff in between. So this is real talk from two very real people. I am Thomas Welburn, chronic health warrior, multimedia extraordinaire. Joining me on this inner path of discovery is the master of positivity, my co-presenter, the Hulk Hogan to my Macho Man, Randy Savage, Chris Allen, occupational health advisor, mental health first aid instructor, and all-around great guy. How's it going, Chris?
Let me tell you, brother. You're supposed to respond in kind, no? Let's role play. Let's not role play.
I can't do the macho man. I mean, the cream always rises to the top. That's just my favorite.
Cream with the crap. Cream with the crap. I've been doing that since I was about 7 years old. Anyway, I am amazing. Thank you. I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I'm on a keto diet. I started it at 102 kgs. I'm now 88 kgs as of today. So that's a beautiful progression for me. And I think we can probably do a time lapse with like me looking sort of puffy at the very beginning of the podcast, and in like a year's time looking like chiseled, and like my facial features being like sharp as a razor in like a year's time, and just do bop, 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 bop all the way through. Anyway, enough of that. Other than that, work is good, business is good, family is good. And my jiu-jitsu journey has recommenced twice last week.
Excellent.
With my professor Steve Payne from the True Dye Academy. Going to get the kids involved as well very soon. But other than that, everything is rather spectacular. Thank you. How about yourself, Tom?
Things are good. Things are, as I've said, they've picked up. I took a promotion at work, so there's nothing bad about that. But yeah, there's more work. It's all good.
Okay, good. Pleased to hear it.
There's no disturbance in the force. Let's just say it's an adjustment.
Excellent. And we've got a guest today.
We do. I was going to announce that. It's the first episode where we've ever had a guest. So this is quite a big point in the Mind Games calendar, probably something that we're going to talk about for a long time. Dr. Damien Pearse, who is a psychologist with a special interest in trauma, shame, self-compassion, and sleep, insomnia. So he's got an interesting resume.
Yeah, I think he might be the Joey Diaz to our Joe Rogan, but he's definitely not a Joey Diaz character. But what I mean is we'll have him on again in the future. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're going to hear during the course of the interview that I think our conversation was very much not finished. There was things that we could have talked about more, but obviously to keep the episode to time, we have to cut it somewhere. I think we could get him back for a whole nother episode. Absolutely.
Easily.
So yeah, great stuff. And yeah, quite a monumental episode then in that case, but obviously that means that we have to cut one section of the podcast to make room for the special guest. So we have decided
Tell the people, Tom. Tell the people what bit you've cut. Tell them. The
in-clinic is going to have to go when we have a special guest to keep the time. Otherwise, it's gonna get big, boys and girls. It's going to be a big podcast.
A bifter of a pod.
Yeah.
We don't want that, do we? We value your time more than that.
So we thought that it made the most sense. So the format of this one is going to be starting off with our discussion, going into the Q&A, and then the kind of finale will be the special guest, Damien, where we have a good old chat with him. So we won't run you through the things that we're going to talk about too much, but we do have a very interesting question on kind of people getting a little bit stressed out, I would say, without spoiling it too much.
Yeah. That's
and
fair.
A couple of interesting articles, one about kind of, I guess, how the narrative of mental health in the workplace is I guess, shifting thanks to a certain subgroup of people, professionals even.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is about a renaissance in psychedelics. I'm not going to say any more. We'll just leave it at that. But yeah, some interesting stuff. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the first part of the podcast, the discussion, and we'll see you over there in a second.
Let's get cracking.
Discussion.
Okay, everyone, we are back. We're in the discussion section now. And I think the first one that we'll start with is the article about the athletes. And
yeah, I think that's a great place to start. It's come to my mind again already last week in a run up to the latest UFC. I believe it's 266, but it hosted the return after 5 years since competition of Nick Diaz. And there was a fascinating interview between him and a journalist, an MMA journalist who works for ESPN called Brett Okamoto. And Nick, as candidly as always, if you don't know Nick Diaz, he is one of the most candid MMA fighters. And he just said, don't want to do it. I mean, of course I don't want to get in a cage. I might get hurt. I might hurt him. I don't want to do it. He has spoken at length and been very honest about his experiences with pre-performance anxiety. And I imagine a lot of that might be to do with substances that he uses, but also the fact that he's getting into a cage to fight for like 25 potential minutes with another man who's been training to do nothing for the past 6 to 8 weeks, possibly longer, nothing but knock your block off. And so when he talks about this, people love it. And the reason people love it is because it's authentic. It's not one of these floating talking heads where he just looks at the camera and says, I'm going to go in, I'm going to give my best performance, I'm going to, hopefully come out with the victory, or I'm certain I'm going to come out with the victory. All these sort of really well-trodden cliches of a fighter. Anyway, this loops nicely, I think, into our sort of long-running narrative of Naomi Osaka, because we brought this up when it first arose. And I learned a nice little new tidbit actually today. I didn't know this. Did you know this? The Calm app, as a marketing sort of strategy, offered to pay off Naomi's fines for her.
No.
So the fines that she got for stepping away from the media obligations that she has.
Wow.
Of course, she could probably bear those herself. That's like a small percentage of her Nike check,
Yeah.
I would imagine. But Calm app came along and as a marketing thing said, we'll pay. And then they went viral as a result of that. We're going to cover your fines, which I thought was an interesting little thing.
Wow.
But yeah. And so we've got Serena Williams, Usain Bolt, all voicing their support towards Naomi. And this is beginning to turn into a wave, perhaps. We've got Simone Biles as well that we've spoken about before, but these sort of instances of high-profile people demonstrating either support or vulnerability was the topic of the article. And the idea is that we're bringing this to the fore and causing a shift in perceptions as it relates to mental health at work. And this is what we've been talking about for a long time on this podcast, things like organizational health strategies. I think it's got some very useful points of view that I do talk about often, but it's got some good stuff in there. So one of the first things that it wants to talk about in terms of direction is embracing vulnerability. What are your thoughts, Tom, about sort of leaders within organizations embracing vulnerability and maybe even showing a little bit of vulnerability themselves? Because I have an opinion about it. You could probably guess what it is.
But it's good.
But
I think it's, there's not really, there's not much more I could probably say to that. It's a good thing. Yeah, I think it makes the staff underneath relate to them more for a start if they show a human side, because especially when it's a CEO or something like that, I guess you feel like you can relate to them more if they're not just a face that never seems to show any weakness. I think, yeah, I don't really know what else to say other than it's a good thing. I mean, it shouldn't even be a conversation again. It should just be something that happens, really.
I agree. And there's one useful sort of individual in that space that we could probably shine a light on. Not sure if you know who Jane Ann Gadhia is, but she's the CEO of Virgin Money.
Okay.
So not only is she a CEO, but she's also a finance CEO who talks openly about her battle with postpartum depression and suicidal thoughts. And so I think it's really good when we can signpost people who are making good examples of themselves, I think, when it comes to mental health care and support. And she's embracing vulnerability there, if you ask me.
Wow.
Now, the next thing, yeah, it's good, isn't it? Maybe we can try and get her on. That would be good. The next thing as well is about monitoring and prioritizing mental health recovery. Now, there's been lots of sort of attention given over to Naomi with regard to this, and also Simone Biles with regard to this. And this is, again, beginning to tip over. I mean, athletes and their teams, performance-wise, have always been monitoring things like recovery. And if they're beginning now to monitor mental recovery through things like sleep, which we'll hear a little bit more of later, because sleep's so important to mental health as well. We'll hear a little bit more about that when we talk to Dr. Damien. But yeah, I think that that's an important sort of point as well, that if we often adopt performance-related knowledge and discoveries from sports into everyday life, and I think that would be a really good one to bring into businesses and organizations.
I was just about to bring something up. I just looked it up on my phone to make sure I don't butcher her name. But
go on.
Emma Raducanu.
Yeah.
The young British tennis player who is, I think, soon to be a sensation. I think she won the US Open. No one expected it. She's now getting loads of sponsorship deals. She's in the public light. I think, and it's kind of on topic, but it's something that I think links with what you were talking about, which is I think that people like her have the potential to set the precedent for things like that. And I think Simone Biles is another good example. A lot of these athletes are quite young, and I think they're probably more in tune with their own mental health. They've been brought up with it more. They've been brought up with that mindset to be more open about it. So they're good people to set the example. But I also worry about someone like Emma, whether she could be a potential flashpoint for negative mental health, being that she's been thrust into the limelight so quickly, and she's getting all these sponsorship deals and all this media attention so quickly. And I don't know what you would say about that. I mean, I would hope it goes the other way and she becomes a spokesperson for it and it's all positive. But I think you just never know with young athletes when they're thrust into the limelight pretty much overnight.
There's always a backlash. There is always a backlash. Look at any sports star that has not gone through a difficult period of time, whether it's as a result of their behavior, not being compatible with the values of the sport they're associated with, whether they become disillusioned and they step away for their own reasons and they get a backlash for that. There is always a ping back. And you're right. We have to be concerned about young people being thrust in the spotlight the way she is. There's so many cautionary tales. I mean, let's list at least three that come to mind. First one that comes to mind, not sports related, but it's Justin Bieber. The second one that comes to my mind immediately is Muhammad Ali. And the third one that comes to mind is Conor McGregor, and that's very recent and ongoing as we speak. The sort of breakdown of all of those people in the public eye as a result of intense pressure and focus. They've all broken, but all for different reasons. The story that led them to be broken are all different.
Yeah,
but they all broke in similar
Connor
ways.
is a very good example at the moment, isn't it? And I didn't think of him to start with. It's quite sad. Connor's as a person, it is most of it is like you say, it's a front. It's a character for his MMA career. Whether he is actually that person behind the scenes, I question that. I think it is just a front. But yeah, I know what you mean with the recent Brett. I think, why would you say that is, Chris? I don't want to, I know we're going off topic a little bit, but this is an interesting journey, should we say. Is it just he's coming to terms with, he was the number one for quite a while, and now he's coming to terms with the fact that he's not anymore?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think I would speculate wildly and say that there's probably an awful lot of substances involved, and I'll say no more about that. After all, he does own a whiskey company, or did own a whiskey company, but then there's been all sorts of other rumours and indications about lots of other things, which I'll leave there. But if you are observed 24/7, every move you make, every action you take, that would be quite difficult to proceed in a way that's consistent with many of your personal values, points of view.
You're going into psychology territory there quite heavily, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, we all hate being observed. I think
there's a threshold. There's a tolerable threshold. And I agree with what you said, where if it's 24/7, just constant people watching you, people scrutinizing you, judging you, and in a lot of ways, waiting for you to make a mistake. Mm-hmm. Because especially with the media, they do like it when somebody makes a mistake, because that sells news, unfortunately, and unhappy news sells more than happy news, which is depressing. So I think, it is probably incredibly difficult. And coping strategies and coping mechanisms aside for Connor, do you not think that part of it is the realization that he's not at the top of his game anymore? Because he's not anymore.
I think he's taken a leaf out of the Muhammad Ali book of bluster and the Floyd Mayweather book of bluster, and just trying to make fights that are lucrative by being someone that you either love to hate or love. It depends on your point of view, isn't it? Some people are magnetized towards him by his immovable self-confidence. But of course, it's very easy to just say these things. It's quite another to perform. And of course, he had a way found for him by the UFC with matchups that people would say are, on the verge of being favourable. But then, of course, there was some incredible performances as well. So, from the MMA point of view, he's been lucky with his career. And as soon as he met people that knew how to deal with his problems, and this is another thing, the problems that they present within the sport, with more footage and more experience, people begin to build the exact antidote to that recipe of skills.
I don't get exactly what you mean.
Yeah, the exact antidote to that recipe of skills comes up as more information is in the public realm. When you're a nobody and you've got this, skill set, it's much, much harder for people to plan when they don't know what to plan for. Of course, the exception that proves the rule is Khabib Nurmagomedov, who was just that good at that one thing that he was just one of the best in the world at. and that was wrestling and ground and pound, and submissions, and everything associated with the ground game and the application of force in that way. I would say that he's the exception that proves the rule. There aren't many that come into the game with that level of skill set to be wrestling with bears from being a toddler, and just that being your focus for your whole life, which loops back nicely.
I was just about to say that.
Go on. Loops back nicely to Emma, doesn't it? Because she's been, working on this tennis skill set for her whole life, and she's now entering into the public realm, and she's an overnight sensation, but there's no such thing. That's been nurtured. That talent, that skill has been nurtured. Whether it's talent or skill, I don't know, but it's been nurtured from a very early age to where she is now. I
wanted to loop back in a different way, though, just before I move on to the second topic, and say, do you think, obviously we're talking about athletes and we're talking about them being poster people and, good advocates of mental health and how there's a changing wave. Do you think that to be a good advocate of mental health or any of trauma or any of those sorts of conditions that you need to have personally experienced it? And that's why a lot of these people are good poster people, because they have, we've talked about Simone Biles, we've talked about Naomi Osaka. These are two people that have personally experienced it themselves, which is why they have become poster people for it. Would it be difficult for another athlete, say, to come on board and try and promote mental health when they themselves haven't really experienced it?
What does experience give the individual?
A different outlook.
I would say understanding.
Yeah.
Provided we have understanding, there is no need for the experience to be present. If the experience is given the individual understanding, then they can put themselves out there and talk about things from their point of view. And they are fighting a battle that is related to their own point of view. Simone Biles, I keep butchering the name. I just don't know how to say it, but you've corrected me. So I'll run with your pronunciation. But Simone Biles has, she's working from her own point of view with regard to how her mental state affects her performance. And so is Naomi. But I have a suspicion it's less associated to the performance for Naomi. She was able to perform despite them. I think it's a preference for her that she doesn't want to do these things. And of course, she goes to the Met Gala and she might be working on a different facet of her personality that is not associated with, press conferences. So I do not believe personally that experience is a requirement for understanding. And therefore I would go on to say that no, someone like Usain Bolt, who may or may not have experienced setbacks, can still be a supportive advocate out there for the concept of mental health. Absolutely.
Because it all breeds awareness at the end of the day.
Yes, it all breeds awareness at the end of the day. Yeah.
Good. And I think that's a good place to leave that one.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so I think that pretty much sums up the discussion part. Interesting stuff. And we hope that, people keep being poster childs for good, positive mental health. Moving into the second section now, which is obviously the Q&A. We got a really interesting question just about people basically getting stressed out. So we'll see you over there in a second.
Q&A.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Q&A section. And we've got a good question this week. Again, going to let Chris lead with this one, read it out. Who is it from, Chris?
This is from AJ. So AJ writes into us and asks, "Dear Tom and Chris, my brain gets stressed out trying to keep up with everything. I have work, a side business, kids, friends, and other family, and I'd like to have hobbies and stuff like that, but my brain feels like a washing up bowl half the time. How do you keep on top of things?"
Jeez.
Question ends.
That's
a juicy one, mate. I like this one. Thank you, AJ. That's a good one.
That is so relatable. And not in a bad way. That's just life.
Okay. Shall I go first and talk a little bit about what I do when I feel this way?
We can do that. We'll take turns with it. You know, you can say your solution. I'll say mine.
Yeah. Because like you say, this is relatable and we can all speak from some experience or understanding. So what I would do is perform an act of sort of exorcism on some of these things that are swirling around in the washing up bowl of your mind or of your brain. So the first thing I would do is like carve out at least 20 minutes, but it might take more. Carve out 20 minutes. I know you're time poor, I can tell. But if you want to be able to make time for hobbies, whatever they happen to be, as well as giving everything else the attention you require, I would challenge you to carve out 20 minutes in order to keep everything managed. All right? So that would be the first step. Schedule an appointment for yourself for about 20 minutes, ideally half an hour, in a wonderful, beautiful, this is a wonderful life type of world. Then what we're going to be going for is something more akin to 40 minutes, but this can be done in a shorter amount of time. Get your coffee, get your drink, make yourself comfortable, pen and paper or diary or something that you're going to write down. Get rid of all your notifications. You don't want to be interrupted. No emails, no phone, no notifications from Twitter or Facebook or any of this sort of thing, all right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use this time hyper-productively. And you're going to go through all these different areas of your life. So just pull one or two out of the air from the question that you asked, AJ. Let's begin with business, work, family. There are a few others in there, maybe other household stuff that, the life admin, things like that. And also hobbies. All right. So you're going to write all of these down as single tasks, as individual bits. Yep. So from your side business type of things, it might be, what is it that you're putting off doing that you really need to be doing? And then from the family side of things, does the family need you on a regular basis to be fulfilling an element of life that you are not currently doing? List out all the other things as well that you are required to do to make sure that they don't slip off the agenda. What you're doing with this exercise, you're taking all the stuff that's in the washing up bowl and you're putting it down on paper. Friends and family, what birthdays, what milestone events are coming up, or, is it anniversary? Is it parents, a visit to the parents? What is it that needs to come out of there and be put down and begin to formulate a plan? What are your hobbies that you want to do? How much time would it take to go to the yoga class or go to jiu-jitsu or, go for your jog? What hobbies, sailing, painting, whatever it is, how much time could you give over? The more granular detailed you get into executing this exercise of exorcism, the more likely you are to have a better outcome later. So what we don't want to forget is the purpose of the task, which is to get everything out and in on the paper. Yep, your mind is really full, but it's also very powerful. So it's not going to be working to its best extent when it's full. The way I liken it is to when you've got that horrible little circle, buffering circle, when you've got too many processes working on your computer. This is Control-Alt-Delete for the mind. And you're going to begin to turn off some of these processes that are happening so that your higher state of consciousness can take over. Now, once you've done all of that, you're going to know that you've captured everything and that you're going to begin to be able to address some of the stress that you've got around these tasks and begin to formulate a plan of execution of how you're going to deal with all the things that I've got written down. You've understood how much each one takes in terms of time. If you want to read more, there will be a space between, for example, 11:30 and 12 that is unaccounted for in your day that you can slot in, reading a book. Small incremental changes make ultimately big solutions. A lot of people overestimate what can be done in an hour and underestimate what can be done in a week. All right. And this analogy can be blown up however big as you like. Most people overestimate what can be accomplished in a year and underestimate what can be accomplished in a decade. So use that principle to sort of begin to weaponize yourself against your stress or against your washing up bowl mind. And that's all I've got to say about that at the moment.
Wow. My turn now.
Go.
Chris, that was quality. And I'm just going to say that I put things down in writing a lot. I think that's a really good bit of advice that is easy to do. And I think, especially if you've got a busy life, it is so important. Put things down, plan your days, plan your weeks, plan the day after, and the day that I would say, don't always plan ahead. Plan what you're going to do the next day. Don't plan in the morning of the day that you're on or anything like that. Try and have a schedule in advance, because then you don't wake up stressed. You wake up with a plan and you know what you're doing. So I guess that's what I try to do. I try to have my papers in order before it actually comes around. But I think something that's worth mentioning is boundaries. It's good to have boundaries in all aspects of your life. But don't let these boundaries drift over into selfishness. There's a fine line with boundaries, I think, where there's healthy boundaries which are good for you and your space so that you can focus on the things you like. But then there's unhealthy boundaries if you start pushing people away to achieve that. And then, you end up losing friendships and losing relationships over it. So I think you need to take a very careful balance with that. But I do think it's important to have healthy boundaries so that you can pursue the things that you want to do. But also, I think it's also good to have a sense of understanding that it's normal. It's not weird to think this and to have these feelings in your head and all this going on. I think most people in the world, in the developed Western world anyway, where, we've got all of this stuff going on all the time, technology's everywhere. I think it's probably, I wouldn't even say it's common. It's probably just part and parcel of most people in this day and age that at some point they will wake up and think, I've got way too much to do today and not enough time to do it. And I think that's normal. And I know that's probably not a good bit of advice, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reassure you and say that there's nothing wrong for thinking that. And I've thought that myself. I still have times where I think that. And it's just about prioritizing the things that are most important to you. And I think Chris said it as well. Cutting the things off that are not important, but obviously within the realms of feasibility, you don't want to be cutting things off that are going to have a wider impact on you long term, maybe cause damage. So, we're talking like friendships and relationships and things like that there. But the hyperproductive thing as well, Chris, I think is a great point, in that if you've got a side hustle that you want to focus on and you don't have much time to focus on it because the rest of life is taking up most of your day, which I think is, again, very normal for most people, you pick that time, you put that time aside, you schedule it, you need to be regimental with it, stick with it. And when that time comes around, that is your side hustle time. No ifs, no buts. And you put everything into that bit of time that you have, and you flourish it, and you plant the seed and you make it turn into a tree, and then that becomes something. And I think that is the most important thing that I would say, because as I was saying at the start of this, I've taken a promotion at work. Things have got busier for me, but you keep a certain amount of time for your side hustle or whatever makes you happy on the side. it doesn't matter if anything else gets in the way. If that makes you happy and that is a benefit to you, then that is important and critical to your well-being in your life. So you make time for that. Even if it's 30 minutes, even if it's just an hour, it doesn't have to even be an hour a day. It could just be an hour every other day or something like that. But you make that time. And when that time comes around, you be as hyper productive as you can in that time. And that is my bit of advice, because time is very precious these days in the society that we live in. So if you have a small bit of free time, you do have to be extremely organized, extremely coordinated in what you want to do. You have to have a vision, you have to have a goal, and you have to make every minute of that spare time that you've got count. And that is quite hard for some people to grasp at first. They'll procrastinate a lot and they'll probably waste a lot of time. But I think with time, you'll get used to it, and you'll start really just pushing yourself and making the most of it, and you will see change. And I think, I don't know what else to say, Chris, but I hope that was helpful to him. I think that pretty much concludes the Q&A section. And I hope that the advice that we've given helps this person with what's going on in their head, because it sounds like it is a bit difficult for them. But I'm not going to stop ranting now. And we're going to go into the next big part of this podcast, which is a absolute first. We have a guest. We have a special guest. Chris is going to introduce this one. We're going to jump over there now. This is going to be really good. Damien Pearse, psychologist. Let's go. We'll see you over there in a second.
Special guest.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this segment of the podcast. This is the first bit that we've got where we're interviewing someone, and we have here with us Damien Pearse. Now, Damien is a specialist therapist, and we'll get to know a little bit more about Damien and his work background and stuff like that. But I was particularly interested in engaging with Damien and having Damien come on the podcast in response to like one of the questions that we got a couple episodes ago, because I felt like I gave the best possible answer that I could, but then I also felt that perhaps the listeners and perhaps the question asker might have a little bit of colour to the question brought to it, where it might have been grey in the past. And if I remember correctly, the question was with regard to the behavioural elements of trauma. How do you overcome the things that the trauma makes you do from a behavioural point of view? How do you get over those? But anyway, I believe we will get there. I believe if there is an answer, we will touch upon it.
He's probably the guy to ask.
I think so. But let's just set the scene a little bit, first of all. Damien, welcome to the podcast. It's really nice to have you here. Tom and I have been keen to explore your skill set for some time now. And we've had to cancel appointments because of work commitments and things like that. And that's just the way things are. But thank you very much for making the time to come and talk to us today. And I guess the first sort of question is really aimed towards your work experience, your life experience, and all the things that brought you to be doing what you're doing here. And it's kind of the watershed moments, really. What brought you to be working in the mental health field? What led you here? That sort of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Chris, and nice to meet you also, Tom, and a real privilege to be here. So thank you so much for asking me. The watershed moments. I mean, I guess, you know, like anyone, I sort of experienced my own emotional pain growing up. You know, we've all kind of experienced that sort of suboptimal parenting, not blaming parents or anything, but they're not perfect. And we sort of experience our own sort of doses of shame and anxiety as we grow up. But I think for me, what really shaped my sort of early days was my school experience. And I experienced quite a lot of bullying while I was at school. And as a result of that, a lot of shame and anxiety that was attached. And I think because of that, I developed a number of coping strategies to deal with that emotional pain, which served me quite well as a young person. So going through university, the drink, the drugs, all of that sort of stuff, coping strategy to deal with shame and anxiety. And I went into a profession that was really well suited to those coping strategies in terms of emotional pain. So my first job was as a journalist. And of course, as a journalist, first of all on regional papers, and then national papers, and then in TV, it was all about that sort of hedonistic lifestyle, and it really sort of was in line with those coping strategies. And so I never really thought about them as coping strategies. I just thought about them as having a lot of fun, and that went on, through my 20s and into my sort of early 30s. But there came a point, I think, with as happens with a lot of people, where those coping strategies start to sort of backfire, and I was starting to behave more and more like a person that I didn't want to behave like. It's kind of like, I think all of us, all human beings, have got a sort of good inner core, but we develop these strategies to sort of cope with pain, and then we start to behave in ways that aren't in line with our values and who we want to be. And certainly that happened for me, and I went through a few years of really behaving not like the sort of person that I would imagine someone writing a eulogy about, when I die. And I think it came to a point where I was feeling so much shame about that sort of stuff, about how I was, that I was almost sort of on my knees, really, and I reached out for help, sort of professional help, and went into my own therapy. And it was there really that I discovered a whole sort of new world of awareness that was completely new to me, and sort of a whole interest in psychology which developed. And I decided to, first of all, do a master's in experimental psychology at the University of Sussex, and when still working part-time as a journalist, and then decided to work towards my professional doctorate in psychology, and spent the next 5 years doing that, and became a psychologist, and then developed a particular interest in trauma, as I'm sure we'll explore. But that was a bit of an elongated backstory, but that's kind of how I arrived where I am today.
I will quickly say, as someone who's been a journalist, I completely know what you mean with that career path. It is often a path to self-destruction, and I think that's just what journalism's like. It's very fast-paced, and there's a lot of, I don't even know if it's if I would describe it as macho culture, but it's very much a case of everyone is against each other to get the best story. I don't know if it's still like that now, but it was when I was there, and it was a brutal atmosphere. And I left, I think, for similar reasons. It was just a really bad culture and a bad environment to be around. I don't know if that was one of the primary reasons that you kind of wanted to get out.
I think you're right, Tom. I think that is one of the primary reasons I wanted to get out, because I think you get sort of brought into that culture, and you start to act according to that culture without really questioning what you're actually doing. And there were so many things that I was doing that I didn't, I sort of justified because my news editor was telling me to do. And I just thought, well, okay, you just do them. You go and you knock on someone's door when their child dies, and you ask them to give them a school photograph, and you do everything you possibly can to manipulate the outcome. And of course, you can carry on doing that. And while your ego is still young, it feels good. But you get to a point, I think, when you start to question that sort of stuff, and you start to think, well, who am I? Am I really this sort of person? And eventually the shame starts to creep up, and then you add on the coping strategy for shame, which for me was alcohol and drugs, and then you get yourself into real trouble.
Well, it sounds like we've gone through a similar journey, actually, I have to say.
It's good to identify, isn't it?
Yeah. Chris? Did you have something you wanted to add to that? You look like you're deep in thought.
Yeah, because some of what you were describing there really reminds me of the concept that I teach people with regard to the stress container. And so if you can conceptualize like a bucket or some sort of container, and you constantly pour stress in, and these stresses could be stuff that's going on in your life, send feelings of pain or guilt or shame, plus editorial stresses with people saying you've got to go and do this and X, Y, Z, and it's all this fast paced. And the coping strategies generally allow that bucket to be emptied. You put a tap on it, and then that coping strategy allows it to be emptied. But when we use these dysfunctional coping mechanisms, like you're describing, alcohol, drugs, it could be avoidance, it could be any number of unhelpful coping strategies, it kind of clogs up that tap. And then the thing fills up and it spills out. And I think that's what you're describing, if I may say so, with regard to sort of acting in a way that isn't consistent with your values, or that could be some of these stress signatures that we have, whereby we begin shouting, or we begin shutting down, or we begin avoiding, whatever it is. And so I'm kind of interested, I suppose, to take the conversation in the direction of the things that you have replaced some of these dysfunctional coping strategies with personally, or if you would rather talk more broadly about the things that you think people can do to replace some of these quite unhelpful coping strategies.
Yes, yeah, and I think you're touching there on a question really, which is kind of what makes you sort of mentally healthy. What constitutes kind of mental health? How can you kind of live in a way that allows you to behave more flexibly, I guess. For me. The first thing that we need to do is to recognize what the emotional landscape you have within you is. Yeah. So in order for us to behave in these helpful or unhelpful ways, first of all, you need to know what's going on inside. So we all need to know that, for example, that anxiety is normal, and that what constitutes anxiety is a mixture of things like thoughts and beliefs, but also body sensations. And once we get to know what they are and how they function in our body, then we can start to open up to them and make space for them. And when we make space for them, we become less reactive, and we can start to choose our behavioral repertoire. So without choosing that behavior, without making that space, we become a slave to what's actually going on, rather than being able to sort of unhook from our inner experience and actually choose the direction and choose to move in the direction of our values, if that makes sense, Chris.
I think it does. If I can reflect back a little bit, sort of what I've heard and what I absolutely love about what you just said there. Is it all right to kind of try and put it in my own words to check my understanding, I suppose? First of all, I think we're talking about emotional literacy, understanding the thoughts and feelings and emotions that arise in us, knowing them, recognizing them, seeing them. Then it's about, to a certain degree, examining those unconscious thought processes that led us to the place where we happen to be in that moment, that sort of psychological location, or however we want to term it, a geographical, emotional landscape, and then changing those and addressing them and going through your sort of emotional thought, feeling audit. Am I getting there at all? Have I understood?
Really getting there. Yeah, I mean, I think the first, you're right. So the first stage is to understand your inner landscape. And the second stage is to sort of unhook from it so that you can observe it. And then the third stage is to make a choice. Which way do you move with that yuckiness of life? No one can get rid of the yuckiness of life, that kind of the emotional pain that we inevitably feel. But when we're hooked into it, when it's kind of like this, we can't see where we're going. We need to recognize it. We need to sort of push it down a little bit. It's still there. Yeah, it's still there. But when we recognize it, we acknowledge it, we know what it is, and we push it down, we can at least know which direction we're going to choose to go in. And I think what's really, really important with mental health is to get a sense of our own values, get a sense of what values are really important to us. It goes back to the eulogy thing that I was talking to about with Tom there. When we are if you imagine ourselves at our funeral, or at our 80th birthday, if we don't want to be so morbid, or 50th birthday, or whatever it is, how do we want someone to speak about us at that moment? And can we allow those, and that gives us a sense of what our values are, and can we allow those values to be sort of compass points that guide us in our behavior? But we can only do that when we unhook from that emotional experience in the first place. So we need to recognize the emotional experience. We need to unhook from it, and then we need to make a conscious decision to move in the direction of our values rather than away from our values, which obviously brings all of the shame, etc.
Tom, mate, have you ever considered the concept of your eulogy? I haven't, and now I am. It's really powerful.
I think some people, you're talking about coping strategies and things like that. I think some people do get into drugs and alcohol not necessarily as a coping mechanism, but as a choice. And I think you have to acknowledge that side as well. And I suppose that can develop into a coping strategy, right? It can start off innocent and then become something a lot more sinister. I'd be curious about you talking or exploring that a bit, because I've always thought that's interesting how someone can go into something like that completely innocent, and it can be a way to enjoy themselves, and then the next minute it's kind of tearing their life apart.
Yes, yeah. You're so right there, Tom. I think let's just imagine. Let's frame this through the sort of lens of values. Okay, so let's imagine that I asked you what your Chris's top values were, and one of those values was connection, or friendliness, or perhaps sociability. That was a value that was really important to you, and you could then sort of say, well, okay, drinking, having a few pints down the pub was in line with that value of connection. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's kind of like, okay, that is a healthy thing to do. I drink, have a few pints, and it takes me in the direction of that value of connection and friendliness. Now, the problem comes when we use alcohol to avoid emotional pain rather than take us in the direction of our values. So if, for example, we start to feel anxiety and shame, and as a way to avoid that feelings, or those feelings of anxiety or shame, or whatever, loneliness, whatever it might be, we start to drink to avoid those emotions, then we can start to see how it could quite easily get into a habit that takes us into in a direction of disconnection. So you could see how you might use 3 bottles of wine every night at night just to sort of take away the pain of the day, and you would find yourself isolating more rather than moving in the direction of connection, which would be towards your values. So I think when we think about behaviors, we've got to think about, is this behavior taking me towards the sort of person I want to be, towards the values that I find really important? Or is this behavior, say drinking, taking me away from the sort of person I want to be?
I was literally just about to say that myself. There's a common sense element there of you need to have a bit of self-awareness of when something that is just a friendly habit is becoming something out of control. Is that what you're trying to say? I
think so. And I think it's when it's about emotional avoidance, when it becomes something that you're doing to avoid emotional pain, then there is always a danger that it could become a sort of a maladaptive habit, for sure.
But how does the average person, say me, Chris is probably different because this is what he's involved in, but for an average person who's not up on all of the techniques and the things that Chris talks about, and that obviously you've, as a psychologist, about, how do you get that message across to the average person? Because they're probably going to be unaware of it. Most people would not know that they were going down that path, would they?
I don't think they would be aware. And I think that's why things like addictions are so tricky, because they often start quite adaptively and then develop into sort of maladaptive behaviors. I think you start to know it yourself when you start to realize that you're acting in ways that bring you shame. I think shame is the key to all of this. When you start to feel that actually you're not behaving as you would like to behave, you start to realize that perhaps this behavior isn't what you want to do. And for me, my personal experience was that dragged on for many years, and it kind of went on until I ended up on my knees and I was, I don't mind sort of disclosing this sort of stuff. I was sort of walking down the street after a night out and just muttering to myself things like, I'm a piece of shit. Why am I doing this? Why am I being unfaithful to my girlfriend? Why am I lying to this person? Why have I just manipulated someone into an interview as a journalist when really they're really suffering, And of course, when you land in that position, it becomes very, very painful. So I think in answer to your question, Tom, it's not easy. I don't think it's easy to suddenly realize when you kind of moved from functional to dysfunctional, but it's I
think last question then from me for a bit, and then I'll move over to Chris, because I have to ask this now because I'm curious. What preventative measures then can you recommend for someone to realize that they're going down the wrong path? Because there must be some advice that you can give to the average person to maybe help them realize.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is quite helpful, if you're not, either you could go to a therapist and do this with a therapist, or you can do it on your own. There's a very simple thing that you can do on Google. It's what they call a values sort. So go onto Google, put in values sort into Google, and it will give you a list of 50 values or 50 or 60 values, and it will allow you to work out what you feel are the most important values for you. And you can whittle them down to 5 values, and you can put them as post-it notes on your computer or on your fridge or on your phone or wherever feels helpful. And you can ask yourself before you start to do something, is this behavior in line with this value? Yeah. And if the answer is no, then you can start to think, well, perhaps whatever it is that I'm doing isn't who I want to be. And then you can start to think, well, maybe I need to address this. Another thing you can start to do is to really start to go inside in terms of go inside your body and mind, and ask yourself whether you are doing a particular behavior or action in reaction to a strong emotion. So are you reaching out for that first glass of wine in the evening because you feel very, very stressed? If the answer is yes, then there is going to always be a danger that you start to pair stress with alcohol and you go down a difficult route. If the answer is no, I'm reaching out for this beer because I want to go and have a chat with Chris and I really want to find out how his life is going, then of course that is something that is in line with your value of connection. So really get to know what your values are, I think is my answer to your question there. And then get to know whether or not you're behaving in response to strong emotions inside.
I love that. I think it's a very ethical outlook, actually. Yeah, it's a good way to measure your inner self as well. I think it's a good little technique. I remember that myself.
Good stuff. And one tip I would really give and is write your own eulogy. Yeah, write. And if it's
that's a bit too much right now. But I'm only 30. But
okay, well, write something that you'd like to be read out at your 40th birthday. Yeah, and what would you want someone to say about you at your 40th birthday party, how you've acted in the last 10 years. And then that will give you a sense of what your values are and what you how you want to act.
Okay. Chris, I can see you're thinking deeply again.
I can't help it. This is amazing stuff. So, I mean, I absolutely love the concept of the value sort. I never heard of it before. And I feel like as soon as I get off this call, I want to go and do a value sort. I think that is a really valuable concept in addition to everything else we've discussed for any of our listeners, with regard specifically to the listener that sent in the question about overcoming the behavioral elements of trauma. And just to summarize that bit, I think the value audit, the value sort, is the thing which is going to help you determine whether XYZ behavior or ABC behavior is in fact consistent with how you want to express your time here in the world. I don't really have anything else to say about that other than that I'm already in love with the idea and I haven't even Googled it. But I just think it's fantastic. I've never done anything like that. The eulogy bit, still turning that over in my mind. Still like the idea. I'm 40 and no one has read out a speech about me on my 40th or anything like that. I'm wondering what could be said now about my 30s and what could possibly help me chart a course through my 40s into my 50s that might help also guide me, because I'm at my heart, I think I'm a seeker, and so these sort of conversations really stoke and move me. Yeah, they stoke a fire in me, and they really move me to take action about things. So thank you very much.
We are very specific types of people, though, Chris. So I think you have to acknowledge that maybe this approach doesn't work for everyone. I think you have to have a very high sense of personal pride and you have to want to do good in the world for that value system to work, surely. Otherwise, it wouldn't really be applicable to you. Is that right? It'd be hard to apply it to everyone.
Yeah, well, I think it's. I don't think it necessarily needs a very sort of strong ethical mindset, because I think your values can be your own uniquely held, personally avowed values. Yeah. So this isn't about picking values that are ethical for everybody. Someone I would never change someone's values. So if for example I was working with a psychopath and their value was to be, I don't know, cruel to animals, yeah, I mean, I don't agree with that value, but you've got to respect that this is a value for that psychopath and that this is what they want to be working with. You would obviously try and gently sort of encourage them not to do it and report them if they were starting to kill dogs and humans and all of the rest. But the key to it is that these are your personal values, and that when you act in line with them, you naturally get a sense of well-being because you're being your true self. So it's not as if we're trying to be really ethical. What we want to do is we want to be ourselves. We want to act in ways that make us feel good. And if we think about this podcast, and for me, one of my values is courage. Yeah, I really value that. I value that value of courage. Yeah. Now, it would have been very easy for me to say, right, I get a bit anxious when I'm doing podcasts or giving presentations. And so, you know what, I'll make an excuse and just sit on the sofa and do something else. It'll be easy for me to do that and I'll avoid that emotional pain. But for me, what's really important is to feel that emotional pain, to know that this emotional pain that I'm feeling now and before this podcast, that slight anxiety, my beating heart and all of that stuff, I can open up to that. I can be willing to experience it and still move in the direction of that value of courage, but also of learning, of curiosity, of connection, all of those things. It's about experiencing emotional pain and still doing what matters. I think that is mental health. If you can do that, then you have that flexibility. How does that sound?
That sounds really good, and I think it's to do with not avoiding the negative. It's accounting for the negative, acknowledging the negative, and then moving through it as and when you need to. Because there's a lot of times, a lot of mental health advice would come down on the side of avoidance of those, negative triggers, or however you want to term them. But I think sometimes confronting them can be therapeutic, and whether it's nervousness about a podcast or some other sort of challenge that stands in your way of reaching your values, then taking account of that, moving through it is what I take away from that. However, I am interested in the point of view that Tom's brought onto the table with regard to I'm enraptured by all of this, partly because I'm sort of working in the field and I'm thinking about how I can develop myself to be a more complete and better person. And I've always been interested in that. But Tom's right. Not everyone's that interested in, self-development. Not everyone's that interested in an internal audit of your emotional state. No one's in, there are people who I talk to on a regular basis who have never meditated. Not once. They've heard of it. Maybe they've even downloaded the app on their phone, but they never used it. And so I think that was a really good question, Sonke. I'm getting a bit wrapped up in the professional side of things here and the conceptual side of things. So I think that's really good advice for people across the board. And what I take away from it from Tom's point of view, I suppose, as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, if you heard this or not, was along the lines of, if things are getting in your way, stopping you from doing the things that you want to do, or causing you to have problems with, the other people that you value in your life, or if it is in some way presenting a problem to you, that's the time when you need to begin to think about behavior change. And it doesn't mean always you have to do that with a professional. It can be facilitated by a professional, can it not? But in general terms, you can, do a thoughtful process and, adjust things in order to reach the target that you've now got in mind. I don't really have anything else to say about that, but what do you think?
I think your favourite word comes to mind as well. Well, one of your favourite words, Chris, authenticity. I couldn't help but think about that when you were talking about the psychopath tangent, because you're basically, you're not telling the psychopath that, it can't, we don't know if it's a man or a woman, but we're not saying that they can't strangle cats or whatever they get some strange kick out of. We just want that, we want them to be authentic and ensure that it goes with their core values. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's what I'm trying to say, but obviously I'm not.
You're not advocating it, obviously.
It was an extreme example, but it's just this idea. I suppose I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't saying that this is just something for people who want to be ethical. This isn't that. This is just getting a sense of what your own values are, so that they can be compass points in order to move towards, in a behavioural way.
And that's great. You have to look at things like this very matter of fact like that, I think. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So, yeah, I agree. Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to say? I think we wanted to talk a little bit about insomnia, didn't we?
Yeah, we wanted to touch on that because I understand that is an area of specific expertise that you have, Damien. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm interested in insomnia professionally, but also because I've experienced it myself, and know how painful it is. And I think I'm not sure whether you guys have either, but it's something that certainly in my professional practice, a lot of people come to me with, and there's not much out there in terms of really good sort of evidence-based literature around insomnia.
So how do you approach it then? Like when we think about insomnia, and we think about someone who is reaching out for help with getting a good night's sleep, you could talk about your personal experiential advice. This worked for me, that worked for me. People say, I've heard allegedly that this works for other people. You know, we can talk about sleep hygiene. We can talk about sunlight exposure. We can talk about, you know, the use of screens. And, you know, one of the tips I've heard is go and brush your teeth again. If you've been lying there trying to fall asleep for more than an hour, go and brush your teeth again, because there's some signal. But when you are professionally tackling insomnia, one must presume that this is rooted, first of all, in identifying what the causes are. Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, I think you're to an extent you're right. So we need to work out what the causes are, but I think they're more complex than people think they are, or at least they're not as. I think one of the big problems that people who are insomniacs have is this narrative of sleep hygiene, which kind of really does kind of interfere with their sleep in the end. So if we're talking about the causes of insomnia, let's just rewind a second. Sleep hygiene is great, yeah. If you want a good night's sleep and you're not an insomniac, yeah, by all means have a nice herbal bath. By all means, have an eye mask and do a bit of meditation before you go to sleep. You may well sleep more deeply, but if you are an insomniac, that I suspect that is not going to help, because what you have a fear of if you're an insomniac is not sleeping. It starts off as a life event normally with insomnia. So, for example, you have work stress, which stops you from sleeping very well, or you have a relationship breakup that you're thinking about a lot. So that is the initial trigger. But most people will sort of get over that life event and then start to sleep normally again. But for insomniacs, what happens is, rather than get over the life event, they start to fear not sleeping. The sleep becomes the issue. So they start to develop a phobia about not sleeping, and the life event might slip away, but sleep becomes the phobia. So you can tell them then to do as many things as they possibly can to get to sleep. But the problem with that is that they start to try even harder to get to sleep. Now, in order to get to sleep, you need to be de-aroused. You need to be in a state of physiological de-arousal. And if you're trying to get to sleep by having a herbal bath or by doing a meditation, you're naturally going to be starting to think, oh, well, I can't sleep and I'm doing these things to get to sleep. And you're going to be sort of working yourself up into more anxiety. So there's a real paradox there. And it's a real cruel irony for people trying to get to sleep, that the more you do to try and get to sleep, the less likely you are to get to sleep. And people need to learn a different approach.
I've got to ask about the genetic element, because I think there's certain elements of sleep that are genetic. Is that right? I mean, I think the amount of deep sleep that you get and REM sleep and the deeper levels, there is a element where you can't necessarily control getting a better night's sleep. Is that right?
I think you're right, Tom, there to an extent. I mean, I think there is a genetic component, to not being able to sleep very well. And certain people will naturally sleep for 4 hours and certain people will naturally sleep for 10 hours. Certain people are sort of night owls. Other people are larks. They sleep really early or sleep really late, whatever it is. So there is that genetic component. Females tend to have worse sleep than males. People who are naturally depressed sleep worse than other. As you get older, you sleep less. So there is that genetic component. But that isn't really the problem of the insomniac. It becomes a problem for an insomniac when they start to worry about their sleep. And that then becomes a sort of a bit of a loop that they get stuck in. I don't think there's much you can do about the genetics, but if you then start to worry about the fact, if you have the genetics and then you start to worry about the fact that you're not sleeping, you're likely to sleep even less. So you the genetics might get you to sleep for 6 hours, but if you're then starting to worry about only sleeping for 6 hours, the likelihood is that you work yourself up into a frenzy so that you only sleep for 2 hours. And you need to learn methods so that you are able to naturally get to sleep again. And I'm happy to go into a few of those methods if we have time. But
yeah, I think that would be that would be great to go into some of those methods for the benefit of, our listeners.
For sure. So the first thing I would say, and I'm just conscious of time a little bit, the first thing I would say is drop all of the safety behaviors around your sleep. Yeah. If you can, make a list of everything that you've tried to do to get to sleep. And you'll often find the list is about that long. I once had a client who had about 60 things that she did to try to get to sleep, including buying a £5,000 bed.
That sounds like obsession, doesn't it?
To get to sleep. So make a big list of everything that you've done to try and get to sleep, and make a sort of brave decision to drop those to drop those safety strategies, if you like. The next thing to do is to map out all of the experiences that you have that are sleep related. So all of those sleep related thoughts that you have just as you approach bedtime, the sleep related sensations you have, and the sleep related emotions. So for example, you might start to make a note of some of those sleep related thoughts that happen. Say at 8 o'clock, you might have a thought, I'm not going to sleep tonight. Yeah. Then your heart starts racing. Then you start saying, well, if I don't sleep for 8 hours, how am I going to function at work tomorrow? And if I don't function at work tomorrow, then I'm not going to sleep the next night. So to become a real sort of mapper of your inner experience around sleep, know all of your thoughts, all of the body sensations, and all of the emotions that are associated with that. What we then tend to do is like what I said before, we try to avoid those thoughts and sensations and emotions. But what we want to do instead is lean into them instead. Yeah. So what we try to do with those sleep related experiences is cultivate our welcoming skills. And so this is a mindfulness ability. So we, instead of dismissing our heartbeat and kind of go, I shouldn't be feeling like this, I'm not really an insomniac, I hate this, I should just do some breathing exercises, maybe if I breathe deeply enough they'll go away. We exercise what we call welcoming skills. So that is literally opening up to the sensation and saying something as simple as, here you are, I notice my heart beating again. Here it goes. It's a regular visitor at 8-9 p.m. every single night. Nice to see you, heartbeat. Welcome to the nighttime experience. It's good to see you again. Yeah. There's that urge to pop a pill in order to get to sleep. You're a familiar sort of visitor again to my sort of nighttime experience, and it's good to see you again. Welcome to the party. So what we're trying to do is we're sort of introducing a playfulness around these inner experiences, and what we're engaging our natural human welcoming response, which is wired into all humans. So you can imagine sort of old tribes that used to sort of meet each other, there initially exists this sort of hostility between the tribes. But there comes a point then when one tribe accepts the other tribe and there is a welcome, maybe a handshake or a hello or a greeting, and there is a natural sort of de-arousal in both members of those tribes. But we can also do that with our inner experiences. So when we recognize, first of all, we map out all of these inner experiences which are stopping us from sleeping, we can then turn to them with a welcoming skill, which naturally de-arouses us. So it's a practice that we can get into that almost feels sort of paradoxical. Rather than trying to avoid them, we lean into them. And more than that, we welcome them. And then we start to de-arouse, and then we start to sleep naturally.
I think that is the perfect place to leave it. I think that's really good, actionable, workable advice. And so if anyone is struggling with insomnia or sleeplessness, however it's affecting you, let's try this, eh? I think that's really good. It's the welcoming part of it was, I think that's really achievable and doable for people. What do you think, Tom?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, nothing works better than making something lighthearted. And I think that's basically what you're trying to say is just change the negative mindset of something into something that as humans we are more, like you say, welcoming to, so that it's not giving negative connotations as soon as that thought crops up.
It's exactly that, Tom. Exactly that. Yeah.
So thank you very much for today, Damien. I think we've both been looking forward to this for an awful long time since we first met.
I think we could keep going.
I think we could. And I wonder if, you would consider coming on again in the future another time. Thank you.
Certainly would. I feel like we didn't really do too much on trauma, and I would certainly be happy to talk more about that in future for sure. It's been really, really enjoyable, actually.
Good. Excellent. I'm pleased to hear that. So thanks very much again for coming.
Absolute pleasure. Really nice to see you both.
Thank you. Can we do like and subscribe before I disappear? 1 minute?
Yes, please do.
So I would like to once again thank everybody for listening and or watching the Mind Games podcast. If you want to send questions, please send questions to the askmindgamesuk@gmail.com inbox. That is askmindgamesuk@gmail.com. We love questions. Please send questions. You can also follow us on social. We are on LinkedIn, we are on Instagram, and we are on Twitter. The handle is askmindgames. So just look it up and you will find us. And that's pretty much it for this episode. So on that note, we will see you again on the next one.
See you.